Have you read the news? Have you let it get you yet? People there are saying how bad you're gonna get. And I've been calling to the sky, please don't let more bullets fly. Have you heard the talk of the cities and the towns? There's a fear from the inside and the toil all around. I've been hoping for my help, find the cure to come and sail. In these times of struggle, you can hear the children cry. Hello, I'm weary. These are troubled times indeed.
Hi, critical thinkers. It's Sunday, November 23rd, 2014, and I am your host, Brad Hartley, and this is Critical Mass TV. Is your brain sad and listless? Are your thoughts and emotions running in circles, begging to be taken for a walk? You've come to the right place. Join us while we unleash our curiosity and employ some mixed mental arts to exercise our intellectual self-defense. The valuable opinions you hear on the show are those of the speaker and don't necessarily reflect the opinions of VCAM, corporate America, or the operators of certain circling black helicopters. But wouldn't the world be a wonderful place if they did? Seriously though, thank you to Vermont Community Access Media, Jeremy Harple and the Aerolites, technician Jim Kelty, and my guest today, Ben Eastwood, for making tonight's show possible. Yesterday, as I was pondering politics as the never-ending struggle for power and influence, I began to consider the concept of success. I noticed an interesting dialectic. Success is, firstly, the degree or measure of favorable or desired outcomes. Seems pretty simple. Secondly, it is the attainment of wealth, favor, and influence. It is not hard to understand that our system worships wealth and that the wealthy get to define what favorable outcomes are then desired. This is contemporary politics refined. The wealth equals power definition of success has reached its zenith. Hallucinogenically out of touch spokesmodel politicians, industrial scale warfare for profit, and massive degradation of the natural systems that give us life are forcing the hand of working people to drastically change the system from the bottom up. A revolution from the commons. Success of the group must trump success of the individual. I always remember that failure is the opposite of success. We, the residents of the commons, realize that enabling, subsidizing, and financially supporting the most dangerous political, industrial, economic, and military activities that humankind has ever perpetrated, the existing paradigm clearly shows its utter inability to operate rationally and even thumbs its nose at people's general desire not to hasten our own extinction. Permit me to read just a few tidbits from a new report from the Sunlight Foundation. From 2007 to 2012, the 200 most politically active U.S. corporations spent almost $6 billion for lobbying and campaign contributions. For this investment, which it is an investment, they received $4 trillion, okay? $4 trillion, which is $4,000 billion in U.S. government contracts and other assistance. That is an incredible return on investment. I'm going to hit you with that one more time. The 200 most politically active U.S. corporations spent about $6 billion from 2007 to 2012. for lobbying and campaign contributions, and they got back $4,000 billion. Again, what a return on investment. Military or war industry contractors lead the list and are in the upper ranks of campaign contributors. This year, the Pentagon will spend $163 billion on R&D and procurement alone. One of the other dominant corporate sectors in political financing is the financial sector, or Wall Street. Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, and other big Wall Street institutions are actually the biggest recipients of the biggest recipients of federal aid. This is because it costs so much to continue to rescue the financial sector after 2008's economic collapse. Excuse me, but didn't they engineer the freaking calamity in the first place? So you throw in big fossil, insurance, big media, retailers, big drugs, and Washington's lobbying address could easily be known as KY Street for its ability to lubricate the procreation of corporate capitalism. Please, let's not be naive about our seemingly insulated politics here in Vermont. Nothing exists in isolation, and if the surface is scratched, we can easily see how private interests and greed make gains at the expense of civil society and the commons. Beneath progressive technocracy lurks the mechanics of class society. So with that as a lead off, I'm going to introduce my guest today, Ben Eastwood. And Ben has some insight into Vermont politics as well as many other things, as he recently received, was it 25,000 votes, sir?
Close to it, yeah.
Close to 25,000 votes as the Progressive Party candidate for the Vermont Secretary of State. Unfortunately, that was not quite enough to carry the day. But how's it going, Ben?
It's going well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you better believe it.
Yeah, it was the whole campaign was pretty interesting. But the results, I think, really speak a lot. We look at the results of the midterm election, and we see some historically low voter turnouts. Yet we see the progressive numbers on all the statewide races were up compared to the Democratic numbers, which were down. Mm-hmm. I think it really speaks to the fact that there's people who a growing part of the community is really becoming a little bit dissatisfied with the powers that be through the Democratic Party.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the Democrats have a supermajority here in Vermont. There's so many. They have such a majority that there's no way to filibuster or even veto anything that comes out of the state house right now from the Democratic Party.
Right.
So, when we look at these things that are going on in Vermont right now, we have to look at them through that filter to realize that everything that's happening in this state is happening through the machinations of the Democratic Party
and their supermajority.
And their supermajority. So, to take another step back from the partisan end of things, mm-hmm. but to look at this reality in the legislature. There's this really large group of the sort of almost shadow government of lobbyists that spend all day in the legislature. They're paid by these big corporations and are influencing the laws that are being made and the policies that are being set for the benefit of these corporations.
Certainly.
And then these same people are then stepping up into political roles. So you look at Montpelier, our mayor in Montpelier is John Holler, who is, it's a nonpartisan race, but if you look back through the Secretary of State's webpage, you can see he's donated money to the Democratic Party and has been identified as a Democrat.
Okay.
So he is a lobbyist for this Champlain pipeline that's gone through, for Bank of America, for Wells Fargo. When you go down and look at all of his past, and you see or his client list, I should say, you see that he's basically been a lobbyist for everything that the 99% in the Occupy Wall Street movement and the Tea Party and Libertarian movement kind of are standing up against, which is this corporate takeover of America.
So tell me who this is again.
This is the Montpelier mayor, John Holler.
Right.
Now.
So this is his role, previous roles.
Well, he's still on the one hand he's the mayor, and ran unopposed his first election. So
And he's a corporate lobbyist at the same time.
At the same time. So then he goes and lobbies in the State House, and he might talk about vaccines and say, well, as the mayor of Montpelier, or as a parent, I believe in vaccinations, but he doesn't ever then disclose that he's the lobbyist for the drug manufacturers. So, it creates this whole double standard, or maybe that's not the right term, but this whole conflict of interest,
yes.
Between, or this question of when our politicians are speaking, are they speaking for us or for their corporate benefactors?
Right, and what's also amazing is that that's technically probably legal to have that built-in conflict of interest when, historically, conflicts of interest at those kind of levels would be a red flag to the population, and also your local journalists would pick up on that and be, the local media would be pointing those out, so there could be a public reaction.
Right. But if we want to take the step back even further then,
mm-hmm.
so we'll look at like the media and realize that the corporate mainstream media is all owned by 6 major corporations. All of it. And these 6 major corporations all contribute to both sides of both halves of the Democrat-Republican Party.
Yeah, I call it the bipolar system.
Yeah, exactly. To bring it back into Vermont and to my race, the reason I ran for Secretary of State was a big part of the reason has to do with this Champlain pipeline going through.
So the Vermont gas pipeline.
Which is the Vermont Gas Company is putting a natural gas, fracking gas pipeline through the Champlain Valley to benefit the Ticonderoga paper mill, mm-hmm. which is owned by International Paper Corporation. So looking at this problem with the pipeline, or this issue of the pipeline,
yes,
and then you look at the fact that Gaz Metro is this Canadian corporation that owns Vermont Gas, that also owns Green Mountain Power, mm-hmm. so owns the utility that controls 70% of our Vermont's ratepayers' electricity.
Yeah.
And is in turn owned by Enbridge and the Quebec government's pension plan, the CAS. So this is a large corporate entity with lots of political connections. And one of these political connections is Jim Kondos, our current Secretary of State.
So who you were running?
Who I ran against.
Against Jim Kondos, yes.
And he was so he was my opponent in the elections. But if you look at his political career, it really follows the classic revolving door trajectory.
Yes.
He was a city councilor here in South Burlington at the same time as he was working for Vermont Gas, mm-hmm. and then he became I believe the title was Government and Community Communications Manager, I believe. It was something like that. It was one of these kind of sort of politically correct ways of saying spin doctor, really.
Yeah, I gotcha. So in the PR side of it.
The PR side of things. And so he had that role for Vermont Natural Gas, and then went on to the State House, to the Senate, where he served a couple terms as senator, and through that time developed a lot of really close relationships with his colleagues in the Senate, as happens, and
the people that would design any regulating that would go on to those industries, right? Gotcha.
Right, exactly, and has a close relationship, political relationship with the governor and with the attorney general. It's this partisan Democratic, thing. He is Jim Kondos is a member of the I forgot the Democratic Secretary of State's organization, whatever.
Okay.
I can't remember the name of that off the top of my head right now. But so he's tied into the party on that end, tied into the corporations on this other end, mm-hmm. And it shows in some of the policies he set. To take a step back in time, I cut my teeth in Vermont politics in the 2012 presidential election.
Right.
I was very dismayed and upset with the turn that Obama took, immediately.
Oh yeah.
As early
Turn
as,
to the right.
the turn to the. It was like let's do the neocon warp.
Yeah.
With Democrats like him, who needs Republicans? Because he refused to prosecute Bush for his war crimes.
Yeah.
He immediately, as early as 2009, started lobbying for indefinite detention. He immediately continued the Bush tax cuts for the rich and the corporations. So
The bailouts for the
bailouts
banks.
for the banks. Right from the start, it was clear that the only change that he was talking about was left in our pockets after.
Yes.
If we're lucky.
Right. Change that we can
that we can
rely on.
To feed the parking meter for half an hour. In any event, so I started looking for an alternative to someone to support, and Jill Stein really caught my eye. And I tried to get in touch with her campaign, but nobody really responded. The Green Party was not organized in Vermont through that election cycle. So then I saw Rocky Anderson speak on Al Jazeera TV, and he really, it was an episode, or the topic was whether or not the media was doing its job or carrying water for the two-party system. And he completely eviscerated, in a very nice and polite way, this Newsweek editor who was just saying, oh, the media does a great job. And he really pointed out all the failings the media's had to hold any accountability.
The objective watchdog that would help the citizen to understand what's happening in the world and make good choices,
right?
Which they're not. That's total posturing.
Right. So that really spoke to me, and I contacted his campaign. And he was a former Democrat. He was running out of Utah. He was the former mayor of Salt Lake City, who is the only U.S. mayor to have called for the impeachment of George W. Bush. So the only mayor of a major U.S. city to do that, even though Bush erased the signature on the Kyoto Protocols, essentially, he still maintained and upheld those levels for Salt Lake City while he was there, and he extended benefits to same-sex partners of city employees in Utah.
Right, in Utah.
And got reelected.
Heavily dominated by the Latter-day Saints.
Right,
Church.
and it's Utah. If you look at the presidential elections, Utah is the inverse of Vermont. If they get like a 20 to 30% Democratic vote in Utah, Vermont gets that for the Republican side.
Right.
So Orrin Hatch, there's a very
extremely conservative,
neoconservative,
neocon.
Yeah. So I was really impressed with all three of those things. So the process in Vermont to get a independent third party, or an independent or non-organized in Vermont third party candidate onto the ballots is different than any other candidate class for any other election. And on top of so the difference is that you have to get 1,000 signatures and have each of the town clerks sign off that those names are on the voter rolls,
which is tough.
And then the added he had added an added requirement that the original copy, the original piece of paper, get brought to each town clerk. Now, there's a little spot to sign on the bottom of the ballot sheet where the town clerk's supposed to sign and say these names are good, this many names are good. But if there's more than one town on that sheet, there's no place for the clerk to sign. So it was okay with him if the clerk just stapled a handwritten note under the back saying, oh, 5 names are good. There's no policy of what the clerks have to include in that.
Right.
Some of the clerks just wrote all good here. But the reality is it became this just slog through to try to get to all of these little.
This is what you had to do.
This is what we had to do as organizing this campaign, was to take these signatures and go to around the state to every town clerk and every little town and bring this thing, and then sometimes go several times because there might be signatures from that town on several pieces of paper that several volunteers had collected from other around the state. and then march, and march them around back and forth from town clerk to town clerk. So it became this onerous burden that actually kept. We collected over 1,600 signatures, but could only get like 400 or 500 of them verified. So we actually sued the Secretary of State and won our lawsuit in order to not have that requirement that he had instituted that was the original copy, but instead to be able to take a photocopy of the thing and fax it to them or
email it,
or well, we couldn't email it because they have to see that, but they're not checking the signature.
Okay.
They're just checking that the name is on the list.
Right.
However, even if they were checking the signature, we already have established. Every time you sign at the grocery store for your purchase on the little machine, you're making an electronic signature.
Yeah, right.
So an electronic signature is already accepted carte blanche across the board.
You're right.
And in fact, they've changed some of the laws to accept more electronic signature on more things. But he challenged that, and we had, all the way up to the Vermont Supreme Court, and we won our.
You
prevailed in that. So
that's outstanding.
And Rocky Anderson then went and became the only constitutionally eligible third-party candidate or independent candidate to make it onto the Vermont ballot in that election. We had Gary Johnson made it on with the Libertarian Party, I think, and. Peta Lindsay from the Socialist Party made it on, but she wasn't constitutionally eligible. She was too young to be president. So, the idea is that this law and this process is supposed to protect the vote and make sure that only eligible candidates can get on, but it didn't.
Right.
It didn't stop.
It forgot that one.
It stopped it didn't stop an ineligible candidate from getting on. And yet it prevented candidates like Jill Stein and several other fairly well-organized major third-party candidates from getting on. And we went from like 6 and 7 candidates on the ballot in the past to 4 or 5 in this last election, and as many as 11, I think, in past elections. So it really brings back into focus this idea that there's only official candidates that are sanctioned by this official system, and it really starts to smell of like Soviet type communism. That is an official party, and you have to make only. We're a democracy, so we have 2 official parties. Right. You can choose from Coke or Pepsi, red can, blue can. They both have the same brown corporate crap inside of them, but the choice is very limited. So
by design.
By design.
Course,
And the explanation from the Secretary of State's office and from the Director of Elections, Kathy Shealy, at the time, was that basically, 10 years ago, the legislature decided that this was important to include, except the legislature was Democrats and Republicans. So yes, of course, the Democrats decided it was important to make it difficult for any competing voice or candidate to be heard.
Yeah.
So that that really alerted me to how broken the system is. And then in doing a little more research, I found out about the corporate connection, and then the pipeline. I grew up in Leicester, Vermont. Leicester Junction, Vermont. My first job was at Depot Farm Supply, which is the site of one of the proposed stations for the pipeline.
Right. The pressurizing station.
Knock on wood, that's been taken off the table, but because that's only 500 yards from my mom's house.
Wow.
But so I had a personal a connection to this pipeline. So. Those were 2 really compelling areas that convinced me to run, and that if nobody ran and tried to raise these issues, that nobody would raise these issues, in that the election would go through and this person would be reelected without even any question, or without even voters being able to ponder these connections and these questions. And I didn't think that was right, and the same thing with that's how I found out about like John Holler's lobbying, was through helping another candidate run against him, because I really feel like we cannot have unopposed elections. When you have an unopposed election, it's just a rubber stamp on
Right.
the system, and it's never calling into question the system or the candidate or who they are, what they stand for,
And then,
or the
you know,
issues.
there's two sides of the reform or revolution kind of a debate, where just the rhetorical question is, can this system, this bipolar system, whether it's Vermont's or nationally, can that system be saved with the level of corruption that's inherent into the process, just the corruption that exists within the parties, the corporate domination, or does, as I mentioned briefly here, does the system require a bottom-up revolution from the commons and from regular working people to actually to replace the existing corrupt system? That's just out there.
Yeah, well, I don't think that necessarily it's a dichotomy or an either or. I think the framework for the system we have is meant to be a living and changeable framework.
Right.
Our founding ideal of our country is that when a government fails to meet the needs of the people, that the people have a right and obligation to change or to abolish it. I mean,
Yes.
that's in that's the basically the meat and potatoes of the Declaration of Independence.
Right. That's in the Declaration.
So,
for sure.
so when we have a government that doesn't represent us, that fails in their obligation to do the will of the people,
Right.
then we have an obligation to, through some mechanism, change or abolish that government.
Right, which can be a reform and revolution simultaneously.
Right.
Because even, like an avid anarchist, non-hierarchical, person as myself, everybody realizes that if you want to have a computer, if you want to have mass transit so we can go to Chicago, if you want to have so many of the things that we're used to having, you have to have systems, organizations, and institutions that can make these things happen.
Right.
And keep them managed fairly and efficiently, but all of those require structures.
Require structures and require public oversight and public participation. And I really feel like that is where we failed. And I believe it's a concerted effort by the media and by the political system itself to make politics seem so foreign and so ephemeral, almost like magic. There's a whole.
It's a mystical.
It's
quality,
a mystical
right?
thing. There's a
only
whole.
the pundits are going to get it, and the politicians.
And there's a whole language around it. But what I've really found is that through trying to take it on head on and engage it, that in reality, it is a machine. And there are rules and laws that govern how it operates. And and to an extent, the powers that be, these corporate powers and these special interests, will play within those rules because that's what keeps the charade up for 88% of the people or whatever.
That's a perfect segue, Ben, for our first video. Jim, if you could play the video on direct democracy in the USA, that would be great. That will lead us in perfectly.
Nice.
The whole idea behind democracy is that the general public should participate in making the decisions that affect their lives. Democracy, like freedom, can take many forms. Even in totalitarian states, there are some freedoms. Likewise with the democracy. There are some states such as Cuba and Iran that practice small amounts of democracy, and yet they are limited to a narrow range of options, and most would say they are not democratic at all. There are generally two different types of democracy, representative and direct. However, representative democracy is not democratic. Direct or participatory democracy allows the voice of the public to be heard, unhindered in its purest form. This allows the members to be self-managed without the use of bureaucrats and politicians. I think we can all agree that politicians are corrupt. Every day, someone is being accused of and exposed for their crimes, ranging from perjury to theft of public money. Society should not be forced to choose the best of two evils. The Center for Responsive Politics, the leading nonpartisan organization that records money in politics, found that in the 2008 elections, 93% of the House of Representative races and 94% of the Senate were won by the candidate who spent the most money. This reality is not just reserved for Congress. Barack Obama also outspent all other candidates, including John McCain, to win the presidency. Much of the money that comes from political financing is produced by corporate donations, political action committees, and wealthy individuals. Top industries literally spent billions of dollars to pay for our current Congress. In 2008, there were 14,800 lobbyists who spent $3.3 billion to influence politicians. This is pretty amazing considering there are only 535 members of Congress. This shows that one person, one vote is just a myth. It is money, not people, that decide the fate of elections and our lives. Politicians do not represent the public. Instead, they represent industries who pay for them to be there. In order to win elections, the politicians must hire teams of people who turn them into demagogues, who use certain phrases, dress in certain clothes, use ambiguous forms of speech about ideas that nearly 100% of the public agrees with, such as the right to freedom and democracy. Their speeches are rehearsed, studied, calculated, marketed, spun, and branded. In the meantime, politicians must hide their true motives, personality, vices, and beliefs. Because speeches are so vague, this causes people to interpret them to the point of conspiracy theories. Politicians may be moral as individual people, but by necessity, they must participate in a system which forces them to be dishonest. They cannot act and say what they want to say. Political representatives do not represent society because their actions are geared to appeal to the least common denominator. When they do act, we can see who they truly represent. According to a study from the University of Kansas, big companies that spent hundreds of millions lobbying successfully for tax breaks enacted in 2004 got a 22,000% return on that investment. Even worse are the companies who received money from the TARP bailouts. Those companies received 258,000% for the $114 million they spent on campaign donations and lobbying. Some companies, such as AT&T, give to both political parties in order to hedge their bets and guarantee access to the political realm. In 2008, they gave out $43 million in campaign contributions. 49% of that money went to the Democrats, and 51% went to the Republicans. Since 1990, AT&T has given to both political parties close to the same amount. There's a long history of campaign contributors being paid back with government jobs. Recently, Obama has been giving campaign bundlers, people who gather large sums of money for his presidential bid, major diplomatic positions including posts in Spain, Norway, Australia, Luxembourg, and the European Union. Obama has also given other posts to financial bundlers, including the job of Deputy of the United States Trade Representative. He has also posted delegates to the Organization of American States, the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, and to the UN Management and Reform. This is routine procedure for both Democrats and Republicans. There is also a history of the government working closely with the business sector, allowing executives to move from the private to the public sector and vice versa. The executives don't stop working for the benefit of the private sector while they are in public office. Companies pay to have access for their own people to sit at the table, creating favors they will receive, usually in the form of regulation and deregulation, tax breaks, and other gifts. While working for the Clinton administration, Robert Rubin helped to merge Citicorp and Travelers by deregulation. After his time with the Clinton administration, he went on to work for the merged company, Citigroup. Today, Robert Rubin is an economic advisor for the Obama administration. Elections are big business. Money always wins. The system of democracy should move from the bottom up. Instead, authority flows downward to shape people's thoughts, hopes, attitudes, and beliefs. Politicians tell people what they should think, dream, and who they should hate, fear, and worship. They shape who we are instead of the other way around. To win elections, our representatives acquiesce to money powers and comply to the public relation firms, the front groups, and the powerful think tanks to help manipulate the media. All of these groups collude in vast networks, propagating information and molding public opinion into what moneyed interests deem to be important, making sure that certain issues are not raised by minimizing debate, and attacking any group that threatens their own welfare. The greatest danger this system produces is the narrowing range of political debate. We are told again and again that the political spectrum is no broader than the range of Republican and Democrat, that society can only make decisions that fall into the realm of taxes, abortion, healthcare, and education. But even these issues fall into a limited range. The political realm has been virtually nullified. There is no meaningful change because the system of representative democracy, by its very nature, demands consistently flat results. It shouldn't be that every 2 to 4 years we leave our homes to vote for one of two people to become our representative. This one person is supposed to represent the public will and make decisions for every human being that they represent. It doesn't matter that 63% of Utah didn't vote for Obama, or that 58% of New York voted against Bush. They will have to listen and submit themselves to the rule of this human being that they have never met and will never meet. These outcomes are against the very idea of freedom. As President Bush always liked to say, "I am the decider." While some people found this statement undemocratic, it is the reality of our nation. All of this is not to say that democracy is inherently evil, but politicians are not representatives or even expressions of human wants, desires, or wishes. It's not that politicians want to be bureaucratic. They are bureaucrats. And it's not like some politicians are demagogues and others not. They all are. They have to be demagogues to win elections. Politicians may not like lying, pretending, spouting catchphrases, or even kissing babies. They have to take money for favors to help large corporations and industries if they want to win. It's easy to see that our politicians are anything but representative of the makeup of our society. Aside from the obvious race and gender gap, these people do not live in the same economic bracket as the rest of society. The personal finances in the House of Representatives averages out to about $5 million, while the typical senator household brings in closer to 16. Jane Harman of California leads the list with a net worth of almost $400 million. These Congress members are not a composite of American society. They do not live in the same houses as we do. They do not understand what it is like not to have health insurance. They do not understand the daily suffering of ordinary Americans. They don't work regular jobs. Some have never even been a part of the workforce. These so-called representatives fly in private jets, attend parties that we will never attend, eat at restaurants we could never afford, dress in clothes we will never wear, and relax on yachts we will only see in the movies. These people know nothing of our lives and our financial struggles. It has long been known that the Soviet style of economics does not work because a small group of elites cannot know all the intricacies and interactions of an entire functioning economy and society. It's just too complex. Only the people on the ground can have any true understanding of the needs and wants to fulfill their lives and thereby create a society that will fulfill the public's wishes. Our style of democracy shares the same dysfunctional nature as the Soviets. Until we can form new ways of social interaction and decision making, we cannot say we live in a truly democratic society, because representative democracy is not democracy and never has been. Our system of voting takes ordinary people and turns them into immoral politicians. The politicians become corrupt, not because they want to, but because the system requires it. These people cannot be reformed, because the apparatus in which they work does not allow it. Trying to find the best politician is not the answer. The reason why is because politicians should not exist, nor should the system of representative democracy.
All right, we are back. I got, the content of that video, specifically about direct democracy, as it has to do with working people, is a little bit limited, but it sure does point out the fact that the direct democracy that is functioning right now has to do with, billionaires and corporations.
Right.
They do have a very functioning direct democracy happening.
Yeah.
For their interests. But, of all the alternatives that I have thought of and heard about and read about over the years, a participatory democratic system amongst working people and middle classes and working classes it is a viable alternative to the top-down hierarchical thing that we're living under now.
Right. I think so too, and I think that I don't know necessarily if a straight direct democracy is the answer. I mean, there's
so many ways to go.
So many ways to go, but I definitely believe that the core of our democracy, let's take a step back. We don't even live in a democraty.
Right.
I mean,
it was never designed to be.
We're a constitutional republic that has some level of participative democracy to it, but we have this constitution that's supposed to be a guiding force that directs us and is supposed to protect the minority is minority classes of people from the tyranny of the majority. But what it has turned into is turning the 1% minority at the top with the most power into the protected class.
Who were the tyrants?
Who were the
from
tyrants?
The get-go.
Yeah.
The document and the time of the Founding Fathers, there's definitely very interesting debate that was going on. Corruption was rampant in everything they had ever experienced as far as European dynastic, ruling classes and aristocracy. I mean, they were used to government corruption.
Right.
So they were protecting themselves against government corruption, but the people that it was designed to benefit were the elites and the aristocrats and the Washingtons and
the people that were able, the people that had that privilege to be able to start with and had amassed some power. And it still depends on an idea of realpolitik and amassing power and controlling power. And the problem with that is that, even as that video said, even if you start off with the intention of being the great new bold Messiah of the 21st century and power to the people, because of this corporately sponsored system that we have, essentially, you need to pander to your monetary base and ignore the people you're supposed to represent.
It would take, we could talk about the forms that a participatory democracy could take forever, because there is almost infinite potential for how that system would be designed. But if it's incentivized to have the people that are in the vast majority participate, then the outcomes are going to be, proportionately a lot better.
Right.
The tricky part is what do you do with these gigantic, basically greed-obsessed and in some cases very, violent, potentially violent corporate structures and institutions that are layered over us, and that we can also cover that at a further discussion. Right. But I mean, it's a daunting task.
It is, and I think that part of the problem, though, is that it's such a daunting seeming task that people then they start to disentangle themselves from it. They feel like it's a tough task that's not winnable. There's no solution,
just disengaging.
And they just disengage, or they just hold their nose and vote for their least impalatable of the two choices.
Or just forget about the whole system completely.
Stop voting at all.
I mean, a lot of my friends don't participate. I mean, I will freely admit it. They don't. They realize the fix is in, and they don't participate.
The problem with that is I do believe that what that video sort of missed is there's a difference in scale, and we talk about the efficiency of scale. That's like the sort of standardized way. Oh, bigger is better because it's more efficient. But again, because when you look at politics, as you get bigger, you need to worry about your monetary base and concentrating power and holding onto that power. You start to lose your moral your moral imperative.
Exactly.
So there's as your size goes up and maybe you get more efficient monetarily, there's an inverse level of ethical and moral.
Sure. Because the institution you've just empowered, that is populated by people, but none of them have any kind of absolute authority. The institution is what perpetuates the big Exxon Mobil, or the big General Electric, or Lockheed Martin, or whatever it is. That institution, which has now been granted all the rights of a human being, has no life force and has no desire necessarily to survive on a living system. So it is incentivized to maximize its gain at any expense. And of course, when you've unleashed 10,000 of those it reminds me of like iRobot, the paranoia over unleashing robots-like machines that are then going to turn on humanity and basically destroy us. Well, we've done that. They just don't look like something out of a 50s sci-fi movie. There are these big, it's the Fortune 500 or the Fortune 10,000 around the world. But we have unleashed those things on ourselves.
On the macro level.
On the macro level.
And on the state level, even in Vermont, we're starting to see that. But
the paradigm is there. That neoliberal paradigm permeates
right
everywhere now.
But I do believe what Vermont has that many and maybe almost every other state doesn't have is it has a system in place already that is very accessible to average people. You know, to run for state office, to run for state house, to run for a state rep in Vermont, you just need to go and get 25 signatures and put your name in.
Basically the same thing in 1840 that you would have to do.
Exactly.
25 people.
And then the flip side of that is if you have an issue and you want to talk to, you know, to bring it to your state rep, you can call the state house and leave a message, and one of the little 8th grade pages that works there will go and hand deliver the message to your state rep, who will then get back to you.
Yeah.
I live in Washington County, and every time that I've had an issue, I've all 3 of my senators in Montpelier, both of my state reps have all I'm on first name basis with all of them, and I can't imagine that in any other state even knowing who they are. When you look at like California and realize that senators in California represent more people each than the entire state of Vermont contains.
Yeah.
So I think on a couple levels that makes our state a little bit of an exception to what on the state level to what they're talking about in that video, and these things that make me hopeful that in Vermont at least we can take care of some of these problems if we can convince enough of people like your friends and my friends who have completely unplugged themselves from the political system.
Well, I'm not saying they've unplugged themselves from political realities. They're
from the machine.
That's
right.
The institutionalized
political system.
State-sanctioned, or voting for representatives. We're definitely, I would say, politically very active.
Right, and mine too. But I think that the voting end of it, or the running for office end of it, is important. I think the political activism and the citizen action is incredibly important as well.
Right, because if you give up on it and you acquiesce and you don't do anything, you have just empowered the whatever you are say you are opposing a conservative, basically, or neoliberal viewpoint in the world. If you don't participate, you just gave them. You just give a free vote.
Right. I mean, I've had some friends of mine who are quite politically minded and active in a lot of ways, but who have basically said, oh, well, if I vote, I'm just empowering this system. But the reality is, let's look at the primaries this year. I think the total was 9% voter turnout. In our primaries, 9%.
And that's only 9% of registered voters, which is only, 50% of people that are over 18.
Right. So you look at like this single-digit percentage of people is actually voting. So over 90% of people don't vote, did not vote in that. So how many people are going to have to not vote before it magically works?
Where does that lead you to? What it does is you're continuing to weaken yourselves as working people, and you're empowering the people that are exploiting you and taking advantage of your non-activity.
So in Vermont, a lot of people also think, my vote won't count anyways or make a difference. But we had, in the Progressive Party, we had a candidate down in the southern part of the state who got ballot access for the primary through, collected her 25 signatures, had the nomination and the support of the party, and who then lost in the primaries because of the low voter turnout and because the independent and name-only candidate who ran against her organized a write-in campaign and was able to get 9 people to write his name in. And because it was a low voter turnout in a small district, only 6 people voted in the Progressive primary for her, and 9 people wrote his name in. And because of state law, this Republican, he's a Democratic, Republican, Progressive, the DERP candidate on the ballot.
Fused.
You're right, but he was really like. He was able to steal that ballot line essentially,
right?
And
Which is a symptom, is symptomatic of people not participating.
Not participating. Three or four more progressive voters had voted in that, or even non-progressives. And we have open primaries in Vermont. You can only vote in one primary, but you can vote in any primary.
Right.
And even if you support a third party or independent candidate, you can still vote in any primary. And because voter turnout is low, there's a lot of fertile ground to make political statements through the primary elections.
And now we're also so there's two things that I want to bring up as we're sort of a little bit running out of time here. We got 10 minutes left, but let's talk about some of the whether it's direct democracy on the ground, which would be resistance movements that are continuing and ongoing in Vermont, and some of the accomplishments of Vermonters, and which is also very rare and unique for this state. I mean, there are a lot of politically active people, whether they're participating in elections.
Right.
But you mentioned the Vermont gas pipeline and gas metro, and I mean that as an insider in that corporation, they would be having a tremendous amount of strategy meetings about what to do based on the actions of a few thousand Vermonters who are literally taking that political activism to the streets and not relying on the system, which is failing their interests. So that's a huge, it's not a win as per se yet, but that is proof positive that kind of direct action is working. It has stopped construction for years.
Right. It has definitely slowed the process down, and I think it's starting to actually bring the problem into the awareness of most voters who really rely on mainstream media and the official kind of story about this pipeline in particular. But then as people are seeing the actual implementation of the pipeline, both physically how it's going in, how people are getting, homeowners are under the threat of losing their land through eminent domain.
Yeah. No, it's going to get rammed with full force.
But we need to look at like two things with I think is the from the political machine end, there's this huge political and donor Enbridge, the Cass, Gas Metro, Goliath, this juggernaut that is like determined that it wants to build a pipeline, and actually the end goal for this pipeline is to connect down in Massachusetts with the national
Certainly.
grid,
or in New York, or wherever they connect.
But it really has no. Vermont is just the convenient corridor.
It's a transit point, a corridor,
and any benefits to the state are really just a greenwashing attempt. There really isn't an actual benefit to the people of Vermont.
It's below the levels of meaningful public interest.
Exactly. So, unfortunately, with the Democratic supermajority, and with no competition, in the gubernatorial race from the left, really, no strong competition. The governor and the administration has been able to really sort of quietly set this through. It's the Public Service Board is appointed by the governor. The governor's chief of staff is married to one of the partners in the law firm that represented Gas Metro in the Green Mountain Power CVPS merger. So it's clear that within that system, the change. There's not going to be change.
They also are feeling pressure because they did not get the results they wanted in this last election, and are realizing that it's because of stance on certain issues that Shumlin actually suffered and almost lost the governor's race.
Right.
Let's bring up a couple of more issues here that are really important in the state of Vermont. The governor signed a GMO labeling bill.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So, I mean, we don't have very much time, but just to go over the fine points of it, the governor has signed our mandatory GMO labeling bill. Mm-hmm. The Grocery Manufacturers Association and several other, the dairy, one of the big dairy trade organizations, mm-hmm. have already filed suit against the state of Vermont for that very simple consumer protection law,
Right.
Or just basically an open, like a sunlight kind of a law. The other thing that's very, very tenuous right now is Vermont's single payer system, which is, which has been a progressive and just from a basically a humanistic standpoint, the most obvious thing that this country could do to reduce healthcare costs is to have basically, state-owned or community-run insurance companies that are nonprofit to help take some of the incredible cost increases out of our healthcare system.
Right.
What's happening now?
Well,
Both of those two brilliant achievements are in serious risk right now.
Right. So to go to like the GMO thing and to bring it back into this idea of some direct democracy, one of the things that's happening now in Vermont is Green Mountain Coffee Roasters is a member of the Grocery Manufacturers Association. So people are really starting to, through social media and through other means, are starting to bring awareness to that. And there's this boycott that's starting to go underway for Green Mountain Coffee to try
if they don't take a stand.
If they don't take a stand, because they're and basically if they don't take a stand against against this lawsuit and take a stand for honest labeling. And here, the interesting thing about Green Mountain Coffee, for example, is that a couple years ago, they were under threat from a big corporate hostile takeover, and there was a grassroots campaign to save Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, and people bought stock in Green Mountain. My partner bought stock in Green Mountain Coffee to save them from this corporate takeover. And so Vermonters rallied to save this corporation, this company that's based here in Vermont. And now this company has refused to take a stand in support of honest labeling, in support of the values that the people of Vermont that saved this company stand for. And that is really disheartening. So but I think if we keep the pressure up, and if people really bring this pressure, this is an area where, without having to lift your pen voting, we can vote with our pocketbooks. There's some other really great Vermont-based coffee companies. That are fair trade and are not so aligned with the corporate mandate as Green Mountain Coffee Roasters. And so those of us that bought stock, you really should get together. There's mechanisms as shareholder mechanisms that we can do to try to force them to take a stand. And these are areas that, like, I think common everyday Vermonters can get together and affect change. With the pipeline, 64 of us got arrested in the governor's office, and as of right now, the governor, everybody that I know of that's got arrested, we got arrested and charged with criminal trespass, but they've basically dismissed the charges. They refused to prosecute anybody.
Right, you were saying that.
When you have people like Maeve McBride, and you have PhDs, and you have the former head of the Vermont State Employees Association, the union that represents the state police.
Yeah.
You have major party political candidates that are all standing together. You have Vietnam veterans, families. All of a sudden, it's hard for the governor to continue his narrative that this is good for Vermont, what the people want, when a broad cross-section of all political parties and all, strong Christians, strong, atheists, whatever, get together and say this. And it's not some fringe group. It's a group of mainstream Vermonters that are that upset by this broken system that are standing up. I think it's got the governor worried. I think that the low turnout in the Democratic Party is representative of the dissatisfaction people have. They didn't bother to vote. If the governor is going to take basically the same stance that his Republican opponent takes, why bother showing up at the polls?
Why bother?
Meanwhile, progressive voters showed up and in good numbers, and it's a growing number. We've increased the number of progressive legislators. And that's important because the Progressive Party is the only party with elected officials in Vermont that accepts no corporate money.
Yeah.
None. Zero, zip.
Right. And they never will.
And never will.
Let's reiterate, too, one more time about the savings that are going to be realized from the very direct democratic push of the Vermont Workers Center and healthcare as a human right and all the other organizers about Vermont's single-payer system. It's in serious jeopardy. The savings are going to be realized by eliminating the gigantic profit margins of the profit-driven companies that are running the system now. We do only have a couple of seconds left.